Okay guys, welcome back to our second video in the video series for Agriscience over planting and planting a garden. During this video, Mr. Williams and I are going to talk to you about soil amendments and things that you would add to the soil, such as compost and fertilizer, to improve your garden success. So in the first video, we spent some time talking to you about site selection and soil sampling. Once that you get a soil analysis back from the Cooperative Extension Service, you would then read that soil analysis and make the determination on what types of additives or amendments that you would make to the soil. So a soil amendment is something that you add to the soil to improve its soil health. And one of the most common amendments for small gardeners is a compost. So I remember being a little girl and my grandmother had a compost pile that was behind her house that she would put food scraps in, and she would incorporate those food scraps in with other soil and turn that over, and then she would use that compost on her garden every fall. So that's the type of compost that we're talking about, but there's multiple types of compost and there's multiple avenues for you to get compost from. You can buy compost from Lowe's or Walmart. You can even buy compost from local producers. Some farmers, like on our farm, we use cow manure that has been composted from the winter, and we apply that to our spring garden. So that's what we want to talk to you about today. Compost is a great additive to the soil because it's rich in organic matter. And organic matter are decaying or broken down things that were once alive. And so any soil that's rich in organic matter is going to be great for your garden. So some recommendations or some considerations that you should make is how old is the compost that you're applying. A seasoned compost is a whole lot better. A compost that's fresher or newer hasn't had time to allow the carbon things or the former living things that were in it to fully break down. And during that process of it breaking down, the nitrogen in it needs to be freed up so that nitrogen can be used by our plants that we want to grow in our garden. So a good rule of thumb is to let your compost age at least 6 months. Now some people have implements that they can put on tractors that will allow it to turn over the compost, but if you're composting your own, let that compost age about 6 months and then apply it. But that's a good question to ask, is how old is this compost? You also need to consider what nutrient elements are in the compost that you're going to apply. So every animal species, whether it be chicken, cattle, or horses, are going to have a different nutrient content or value in the compost that you would apply to your soil. So that's a consideration that you need to make as well. And then a few tips before you apply it to your garden. You need to select a time that you know that it's not going to rain. And after you've tilled your garden up or you've plowed that garden up, then you're going to apply that compost to the soil and incorporate it into the soil. And then 2 weeks later, you're going to plant your garden vegetables or seed your garden. That way that during that 2 weeks, that compost has an opportunity to incorporate itself into the soil. Another rule of thumb is to apply about 1 inch to 2 inches thick. I know that sounds like a lot, but if you're using, like some people might use like a manure spreader or might even use like a fertilizer spreader to apply this compost, 1 to 2 inches thick isn't that deep. And then you want to make sure that you do this at the right time. So the fall or spring are the recommended time. And make sure that you understand that if you're using a bag compost, that you consider what type of elements are in that bag compost and where that is from. So at this time, Mr. Williams is going to talk to you guys a little bit in the greenhouse about different fertilizers.
Alright guys, welcome back, and what we're going to look at right now is we're going to talk about fertilize and how to apply fertilize. First thing I want to call your attention to is this bag of fertilize. If you'll notice, this is a general purpose fertilize, and this is something that's very common, very common when we're looking at improving any type of garden, flower, anything like that. So when we look at this, Miss Wayne had talked in some earlier videos about NPK. These numbers, those are your micronutrients, and they are the most essential. So that means this one here has 20% nitrogen, 20% phosphorus, 20% potassium. That's 60% of what's contained in this fertilizer are these macronutrients. The micronutrients that she talked about earlier are located down here at the bottom. And it gives percentages, and it gives actually a lot of the additives that go along with this, making that fertilizer beneficial to your plants. All of this, by law, has to be on your fertilizer. So how does this need to be applied for you in your garden? Well, what we look at is we take, for a garden perspective, what this is called is a water soluble, which means as soon as water hits it, we can put it in water and it's readily available to plants. That's kind of like what you would see if you go out to Walmart and you go and buy some Miracle Grow. That's water soluble. What we like for you to apply for your garden is a granular, and it's slow release, which means throughout the fertilized season and the garden season, it releases the fertilizer as needed to the garden in its particular use. Now, there's a lot of things that you need to look at when you adapt your garden to what that you need, and that can be taken by the color of your plants, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, and then we can also look at the actual I guess you could say the look of the plant, not necessarily the color, but like if it curls or crinkles and stuff, all of which goes back to your fertilizer and what that you need to look at. The next thing that we need to go and talk about, so how do we go through and apply fertilizer? There's a couple ways that we can go apply. If you're doing a water soluble, which is what we're referring to right here, we take a cup and then through a mathematical equation, we go through and we figure out exactly how much weight out of this to go apply to a 5-gallon bucket of water. We place that in there, mix that up, and through a siphoning device, which that you see right here, we go and we apply that to an outsourcing water issue. Now, for most of you all in your gardens, that is not going to be an issue for you all because you're going to go and apply a granulated, which is hand, and we call that side dressing. We either go beside the plant, which is called side because you're putting it right beside the plant, or you use what's known as a broadcasting method. And the broadcasting method is just where that you're slinging it from side to side, either with your hand or like with a seed sower. So those are your two types of applications as far as like with side dressing, which you do after the plants come up, and then also with broadcasting when you're applying it to the garden before that you get started. The next thing that we're going to look at is how to address pH. As I told you before, when you look at the plants, some of the plants are going to be a bright yellow, which could be nitrogen, could be actually a pH issue. When you soil test, like what we discussed in an earlier lesson, we go and we take that pH type and we can either raise it or lower it. If we have a pH, say for example, that is, say 7.5, and we need a 6.8. What we do to lower that pH is we go and we take a fertilizer that is typically acidic, and we apply that fertilizer, and typically that will lower, all right, is from taking it from that 7 down to the 6. If we want to raise pH, like for example, we have a really acidic stuff, it's burning everything, turning everything yellow, we take it from like a 4.5 and we need it to be a 6, we're going to apply a lime. All right, the next thing we'll look at is there's two types of lime. There's what's known as dolomite. Dolomite is known as burnt lime. That's what if you go to southern states, if you have a severe issue, like for example, you're planting a garden on old tobacco ground, and you need to get that acid soil that's really depleted, and we need to bring it up, we're going to put some dolomite, which is burnt lime. But for the most of us who've got a garden out here and we just really need to go through and just make sure that it doesn't get too acidic, we're going to get a granular regular lime, and we apply that using a broadcast method before we actually go and plant our garden. Once we plant our garden, we have issues, then we'll actually go through and we'll apply that burnt lime or dolomite to actually through side dressing to bring that up. The last thing that we want to talk about that has to deal with fertilizer today is making sure you use the right amount. Fertilizer is very expensive. This particular bag right here is $25. For example, if you go and use Miracle Grow, it can actually go through and cost you, anywhere from 10 to 15 degrees, or $10 to $15, excuse me. when we look at this particular part, this is the most important part. As long as you're looking at these particular issues, it doesn't make a difference whether it is the Walmart brand, whether it's the Miracle-Gro brand, or whether it's the Lowe's, wherever you may go. As long as you're getting these essential nutrients, that micro and macronutrients that you need, you'll be ensured that you go through and get what the plants need. So use some smart consumerism. If they have the same numbers, even though it may be the off-brand, as long as they go and they have what the plant needs, go with the one that best meets your financial status at that time. Guys, we hope that you have a great experience being out here in the greenhouse today and also learning about Fertilize. If you have any questions to us, please post it to our Google Drive and Google Classroom, and we'll get back with you as soon as we can. Hope you're staying safe. Talk to you later. Bye.